started. Sorry about that. Technical issues as always. So welcome everyone to the stream. So we'll be looking at some, I guess I've got a bit of a greeting now. Konnichiwa. Hello everyone. So we'll be looking today at some things we've already gone over, but we're going to be looking at them in a little bit more depth. And this is particularly true with the first thing we're going to look at today, which is the ga particle, which we saw in one of our very early lessons. And we introduced our basic particles of wa, mo, and ga. But before we go there, let's have a look at, first of all, I've got a link here to my ad, which is up on Gumtree. I do private lessons in-house if you live in WA. Otherwise, I'm happy to do Google, Skype, or even we could do YouTube lessons, I guess. And this starts like this. You can PayPal me, cash or bank transfer, anything is fine. I tutor mainly high school students looking to prepare for exams, but I also teach many people who have learned Japanese from scratch. So I teach absolute beginners, and I also teach JLPT, exam preparation. I have level N2 myself, but I'm going to be going for N1 end of this year in December. Fortunately, we only have one JLPT a year in WA. Anyway, you can just email me here and I'll be happy to talk to you about it. Alright, so last week we looked at one of our first forays into male-female speech in Japanese. And the way we looked at this is through this da. Okay, now borrowing Tae-Kim's language, but calls the declarative da, just because it kind of adds this declarative tone. So, you know, declare, think of this word, but just think of it as a way of adding confidence or emphasis, and it kind of gives a masculine tone. So what were the rules with this? Well, we can add it to nouns and na adjectives, but we can't add it to e adjectives. Okay? So here I was just kind of showing you that, and I should probably add it here, that da does not equal there we go. Da does not equal des. Okay, I spent the first bit of the lesson talking about this. So da and des are two separate things. I mean, I was taught this in school, but they're not the same thing. What this da does is, if you go back to one of our earlier lessons on state of being, it makes that state of being explicit. But basically I said, well, if we have these two sentences, you know, why is it that we imply the state of being student or busy when we don't have a des? But then when we do put the des, we then suddenly start not implying it and saying that des is to be. It doesn't quite work that way. So I kind of said, well, this to be or to be copula, whatever you want to describe this des as, it doesn't really seem to be very consistent when you look at the plain form. Okay, so let's look at some examples. So we had, again, the rule, we can't add da at the end of e adjective, so ramen wa oishi yo. So as for ramen, it's delicious, and this isn't really male or female speech. But then we can add something like sportsu wa jouzu ne. Alright, bit feminine, because we've got this ne attached directly to this na adjective. And conversely, when we put the da in, jouzu dane, it's coming across as a bit more masculine. Okay, the next thing we looked at was our no particle. Now, our no particle is very important, and really it's a way of linking two nouns. I didn't mention this last week, but we can link multiple nouns. We can have three or more. Normally it's just going to be two though, but mainly you're showing ownership, connection, membership, some kind of joining between the two. So a very common one that a lot of people will learn is when we're doing their self-introductions, watashi no namae, so my name. Okay, now I said that there's three kind of ways we can translate this. We can say of and read the sentence backwards, so name, of me or I, we can think of this as like an apostrophe S. So I or me, apostrophe S, name, my's name, doesn't really work with English grammar, but you kind of get the idea. Or we can just kind of think of, well, whatever the no, whatever is to the left of the no, kind of changes it into the possessive. So my, mine, yours, whatever. Anata no, for example, would be yours. Should probably separate that one out. But my or mine, for sure, would work here. Alright, so there's kind of three ways we can think about our no particle. Okay, so look at some examples. So we have Nihon no kuruma. So car is kuruma, no of Nihon, Japan. Okay. Now I did this example of as well, and I would encourage you all to go back and watch the video because I explained this no in a different way. And this is even students who have been studying Japanese for quite a long time, they don't really think about no particle in the correct way until this kind of example is explained to them. So it's very important you have a look at this. Okay, so that was one thing. The other thing that no does is it kind of replaces a noun when it's obvious from the context. So I would recommend you go look at this, but we can say, for example, Yamakawa no wa. So as for Yamakawa's something, and in the context I was talking about a bag. Okay, the other thing we looked at was negatives. Okay, this is again, nouns and not adjectives, we apply the same rule, so we just add janai. E adjectives, we remove that last e and add kunai. So oish kunai. There was one exception for good, and we use this word yoi. So e is good and yokunai is not good. Alright, now a good example sentence to remember this is you just remember how to say I don't like something, which is amari, not very much. Ski janai, don't like. So if you remember this, you'll remember the rule. Ski janai. Then konai ga wa omoshiroku nai yo. This movie is not very interesting. I went over this difference between basically dewa arimasen versus janai desu. Now again, would really encourage you to watch the video if you don't know what I'm talking about there, or if you think, well, I've never heard of janai before, I've only heard of dewa arimasen. I would watch last week's video, which I go to quite a lot of detail explaining why you perhaps should rethink that. Alright, ga. Okay, so we're going to be looking at ga with a bit more detail today. Alright, so when we looked at ga originally, we kind of saw that it was the difference between talking about a specific thing versus a general thing. But the other thing we kind of said as well, ga is often used in questions and in the answer to those questions because we're asking about something that's unknown. So therefore, we can't really use the wa particle. And again, look back on our basic particles lesson too, if you're still unsure about that concept. But with ga, we're going to say, well, when we ask about things that we don't know about, we use ga to both identify that thing that we don't know about, and then when the person answers your question, so it tells you what the unknown thing is, for example, then they use the ga to point out that unknown thing. So for example, who is the student? He is the student. This kind of example. Alright. So we can say, for example, a very broad sentence, okay? Okay. We've kind of looked at this quite a few times, but sushi wa suki desu ka? So what is this saying in English? Well, it's, we can translate wa as for. So as for sushi, do you like it? Suki desu ka? Do you like it? And I just want to point out that, basically this is in brackets. It's all implied. But anyway, let's go through this. So this is asking a general question. Alright, but here we kind of know what we're talking about. We know what our topic is going to be, hence we can kind of introduce it with the topic particle. But now we're dealing with unknowns. Okay, so we're dealing with the unknown. So what do we do in this instance if we can't say, you know, as for what do you like? Doesn't really make sense. So we can say, for example, uh, okay, so here we can't really use wa here anymore because we've added this word donna, which means what kind of. So again, we've introduced this unknown, so now we can't really use wa anymore. Donna sushi ga suki desu ka? So now we need a ga because it's asking about what type of, it's an unknown type of thing. Alright, so let's look at another example of how we could, how the wa and ga particle is slightly different. So it's always the question you got to ask yourself, are you dealing with a known or an unknown thing? Okay, so our sentence here, we've got ski na, okay, because ski is a na adjective, so basically you're likable. Tabemono, this means food. Wa nan desu ka? What is it? So as for the food that you like, what is it? So although if you think about this sentence, you don't know what the food they like is, hence why you're asking about it. But the topic that you're asking about is determined. So this is why you need wa here and not ga. But so but if we were example to say we're supposed to say this, tabemono wa, so as for food, nani ga suki desu ka? So it's basically like within food, what are the things that you like? Okay, so again, there is quite it is a subtle difference, but you've got to see things now. Well, we've introduced a what are the things, so there is a big unknown here. It's still talking about a set topic, so we can use our tabemono, but you notice here, nani ga suki desu ka? So whenever we have these kind of question words in here, we're going to need our ga in there as well. Okay, so let's look at another example. So our ga, remember, can be used to talk about specifics. All right, so just say we have someone called Tanaka. Oops, probably shouldn't do that capital. Tanaka. Okay. So think about this. We could say Tanaka wa isogashi. So as for Tanaka, he's busy. But we could also say now what's the difference between these two sentences? Well, as for Tanaka, he's busy. But if we use our trick of translating ga as the thing that or the one that, so we kind of get a bit of a different translation for this one. So this Tanaka ga isogashi, it's kind of unlikely that someone's just going to say this, blurt this phrase out basically. It's also just going to say Tanaka ga isogashi. You know, someone could say this one out of nowhere, but this second one for sure, generally something else has come up. So it's like, oh, who's busy today? Or, you know, who's that guy who's running around like a madman? Okay, so Tanaka ga isogashi. So this ga, really points out that Tanaka is the one who is busy. So the specific guy who is busy. Alright, so that's a basic translation. Just a review, I guess, more than anything, of what our ga particle can do. Okay, so I want to change it up a little bit, and we're going to move away, I guess, from these basic grammar things and look at more counting in Japanese. Now, counting is quite a big topic in Japanese because of something called counters. Alright, so I guess the big thing to think about with Japanese is that there are no real plurals. They kind of are, but not really. Or at least plurals are thought of quite differently. So for example, if you say something like if you say this word inu, for example, this means a dog. But if you say something like inu 2匹 飼っています. So inu is dog. Oops. 2匹 is our counter, as we'll see what that means in a second. But this means two animals, basically. So the plural, nothing happens here. This still means dog. But when we say inu 2匹 飼っています, it means I have two dogs. So that S has just kind of been put in there, although inu is still the same word. So the words don't get affected by number. Let's just put it that way. So how do you tell the number? Well, you use these things called counters. Alright, so what are counters? Well, counters are just basically it's a kanji or a word which allows you to count certain classes of things. And we'll see there's a table that I'll bring up in a second of the various counters that I would say you need to know. There are so many that even Japanese people get confused. And I remember there was a very funny, one of my favorite TV shows in Japan used to have a little segment where they would test people on their knowledge of counters. But there's a table of about 7, 8, or 9 which will put you in. If you know that amount, you'll be fine. But there are a few counters which a lot of you will already know. But anyway, the basic formula for a counter is something like this. So you have the number, and then right after it you have the counter, and then that's how it works. So a lot of you may be able to count already, but counting is the normal counting is actually quite easy in Japanese. So if you know the numbers from 1 to 10, you can count all the way to 99. And then once you know the word for 100, you can count all the way to 1,000. And then once you know the word for 1,000, you can count all the way to 10,000, and 10,000. You just keep going. So that you don't need to know many words. It's unlike some other languages I've dabbled in, like French, which I found the counting a little bit difficult sometimes. But I didn't spend much time on French. So, Sanji Go. Okay, so these are the numbers up to 10. Okay, now the counter that I said most of you will be familiar with is this one called sai. And this is the counter for age. So we could, example, say sansai desu. I am 3. Okay, so we can see sun is here. So this is a very good example of a counter, right? We have our number and our counter, and then it does something slightly different to then just saying 3. It's now I am 3 years old. Alright, this is what this counter has done of sai. Alright, so a lot of people would be familiar with this. They probably don't realize that this was a counter, but this is a good kind of way to get introduced to counters in Japanese. So how do we continue to count? Well, once we get to 11, all 11 is 10. You say the word 10, and then you say the word 1. So the word 10 is ju, and then the word for 1 is ichi. It's a ju ichi, 11. Now we just keep going up with the other numbers, following the same thing. So 10, 10 2 is ju ni. Alright, and we can just keep going all the way up. Now, one thing that does matter is that she has another reading of yon, and shichi has another reading of nana. Now, why this is, it's not super important, but just keep in mind that shi in Japanese can also mean deaf. So they try and avoid using she in some sorts of words, because otherwise it means death. So for example, if you go to Japan and look at a hotel room, you'll find there are no rooms that end in 4. So there won't be like a room 104, for example. And the hotel I used to work at, I mean, this is not just the hotel I worked at, most hotels I noticed this, they won't have any rooms, there will be no 4th floor, for example. So the hotel I worked in was like level 2, level 3, level 5. And there'll also be level no level 9 either, because this ku can mean suffering. So this is kind of the fun with kanji sometimes. But yeah, so the rule kind of is before 10 it's read as shi, then after 10 it's read as yon. So for example, 14 is juyon. Okay, and like 40, yonju. Alright, so this is kind of an example of, well, this is just how we keep counting. So 11 was 10, 1, and so 40 is 4, yon, and ju, 10. So like we can take a number, 66, alright? So first we do 610 for 60. So, oops, shouldn't do the kanji just yet, quite yet. Rokuju, 60, and then we just need to add 6, so roku. So rokuju roku, 66. Okay, and so we can go all the way up until we get to 99. Kyujuku. Kyujuku. Alright, so 99. Now once we get up to 100, we need to know this word, hyaku, and then we can keep going. So, enter type. Oh my gosh. There we go. Hyakuichi. Alright, and we can just keep following the normal rules all the way up. Then we get to 1,000, which is sen. And then man, which is 10,000. Okay, now there are some pronunciation changes. I'll go into those in a little bit more depth, but as long as you can remember this basic system of counting, it's pretty good. Now these two numbers in particular are kind of important because if we think about Japanese money, they're notes. We have the 1,000 yen note, we have 5,000 yen note, and we have a 10,000 yen note. So it's important to know these words for being able to use money properly. So notice here though, when we say a 1,000 yen note, we say sen, en, satsu. Okay, so sen is 1,000. We don't need to add 1 in front of it. We can just say sen. Now en is how the word yen is actually said in Japan, so they don't add a y to it. Just en. So sen en, 1,000 yen, and satsu is like a note or a bill. So sen satsu is 1,000 yen note. Okay. Now for 5,000 yen, we say go, which we saw all the way up here. This means 5. So go, sen, en, satsu. So go, sen, satsu. So this is a 5,000 yen note. And then the other one we have ichiban yen satsu. Okay, so notice here for 10,000 we actually put ichi in the front. So 1,000 we don't, man we do. But yeah, so this is 10,000 yen. Note. Okay. Now the other significance that this word man has is that when Japanese people count, they tend to count in terms of lots of 10,000s, whereas in English we tend to count in sets of 1,000. So that takes a little bit of getting used to. So for example, hyakuman. Okay, so we had this word 100. So hyaku, and then we had man, which is 4 zeros. Let's just, I wonder if we can do this. No. So it's 6. Okay, so this word hyakuman is a million. Okay, hyakuman. So this is an important kind of word to remember, because in English we tend to, especially when we're dealing with big numbers, we tend to deal in the millions, and Japanese are going to tend to deal in the hundreds or thousands of 10,000s. So it's kind of, it takes me, I mean, even now I don't think I'm really used to it, but I notice when Japanese people count, they often make mistakes when they get to big numbers. I don't know if that's just me and the people I hang around with, but I'm not saying either system is superior, by the way, but they're just different. And because it's like a whole decimal point difference, I guess, it can sometimes be a little bit hard to convert money or think about large numbers well. Okay, but that's kind of, if you know all these numbers, you can count, pretty much indefinitely. There are numbers higher than this, but for now, we'll just deal with these ones. Okay, so we've got these numbers. So where do we go from here? Well, the other thing we should keep in mind is the date systems in Japan. Okay, so dates in Japan, this often causes a lot of issues, especially for my students who are doing exams and things, because these are very common exam questions, but I find a lot of people don't tend to study these areas very well. Uh, and I think people think, oh, well, I just can't be bothered learning it, and I don't know what their mindset is. I'm just kind of projecting, I guess, but I've noticed that people don't know this stuff very well. But it's very important to know how to say dates and times, especially in exam situations. But also, if you want to ask how to get to places or talk about future plans, it's super important. If you want to plan things, you need to be able to know how to say the current date and time and all these kind of things. So where do we start with dates? Well, the first thing to keep in mind is that uh, Japan actually has kind of parallel systems of dates. So they have a kind of Japanese date that they use, and then they also use the more Western, or I guess they're called the Julian calendar, whatever the current system that we use in Australia anyway, of the with a common common year zero, and then we move on from there. But they run both of these systems in parallel, and so more you'll see like on Japanese documents they'll list generally the Japanese date, but depends. So we have this wareki system, okay, which is the Japanese calendar system. Now, how does this system work? Well, it's all based upon the emperor. So when a new emperor kind of ascends to the throne, I don't even know if the word throne is correct, but when a new emperor is in, um, they start a new era, basically. So I think there's some kind of committee that comes up with a name for the era. I actually have no idea how it works, but I think that's how it works. You have a new emperor with a committee, and then they give the name of that era, something which they want to kind of strive for, I guess. So if we look at the current era, it's Heisei. So this isn't the emperor's name or anything. Um, Very roughly, uh, this Hei is kind of the word Hei, well, I guess the kanji for Hei is part of the word for peace, and Sei means to make, so it's like creating peace, making peace. Anyway, but they generally give it a kind of a nice title. Okay, so um, Heisei started in 1990 or 1989. Can't quite remember, but if you do a Google search, you'll be able to find what the current Heisei is. I always just remember that when I was in Japan, it was Heisei Jugonen, but we'll look at this in a second. So I think the current emperor is looking to abdicate or at least step down. So the Heisei era might come to an end sometime soon. Before that, it was Showa. Showa. And Showa was from 1926, I think, to 1989. Alright, this is the Showa era. Alright, so when that finished, then the next era started, okay? So we're about, I really should just look it up. Yeah, it was 1989. Yeah, so Heisei's 2018-30. I thought it was. Pretty sure I just said it. Alright, so we're currently in Heisei 30. Okay, so how do we talk about this date system? Well, we're going to start with the year because we're also talking about the Heisei period and this is talking about years. So we need to know the word for year. And in Japanese, this is nen. Alright, now nen is again a counter, which is why we're looking at it under this counting and counters section. And it's a counter for years. So how do we talk about the year? Well, let's not complicate it too much with the Wadeki system, and we'll just look at the current kind of Julian calendar system. So it's 2018. So we just add nen to the end of here, and now we're saying the year is 2018. It's not just a random 2018 number. It's this year. So how would we read this number? Well, if we go back up, we saw that sen is 1,000. Okay, this is 2000, so we say nisen. Alright, and then we want to say 18. Well, so we just say 10 and 8 for 18. So juhachi. Okay, and then nen. So nisen juhachi nen. Okay, so this is 2018. Alright, how do we do it with Heisei? Well, generally we say the era first. So Heisei, and then we need to do it's year 30. So 30 is 3 with 10. So sanju nen. Heisei sanju nen. Okay, so it's the 30th year of Heisei. So you can see it's a little bit confusing because it's the 30th year of Heisei, but it's 2018, and next year will be 2019, 31. So you get used to it if you like. When I was in Japan, I was writing this Heisei date down all the time. It wasn't so hard, but it's like as soon as I come back to Australia, I kind of forget what Heisei year it is. But like I said, I have like a point in my head because I was in Japan in 2003, so I was very used to writing it then, and again in 2011. Okay, so we've got the years. What do we do next? Well, we look at the months. So months, we use this character. Did I write nen? I didn't. Should probably put the kanji. That's the kanji for year. Okay, so we have this kanji. Now this kanji actually means moon. Alright, and if you think about a moon, like the lunar cycle, it's a month, so kind of makes sense. Now this kanji, in this instance, we're going to be reading it as gatsu. Okay. Now I want to point out just a bit of revision. So remember we had our onyomi and our kunyomi for our Japanese characters. So remember our onyomi was our Chinese reading, kunyomi was our Japanese reading. This is an onyomi for this character, okay? It's a Chinese pronunciation, I really should say. Chinese pronunciation. Now, the kunyomi for this is tsuki. Alright, now tsuki is how we actually say the word moon. So again, if you went up to Japanese people, this is an onyomi, and you go up to them and say gatsu, it doesn't mean anything to them. It's meaningless. But if you say tsuki, you know, this means moon. Right, so there's always important to keep that difference in mind. Alright, now apart from some exceptions, readings, which we'll look at in a sec, these months are pretty easy, okay? Because again, this kanji is just a counter. It's just a counter for months. So we just follow our counter formula, which is we get our number, 1, and then we put the counter for month. So ichigatsu, this means January. Okay, ichigatsu, first month, or 1 month, I guess I should really say. 1 month. Okay, and the same thing, nigatsu, February. Now there are a few that get pronounced slightly differently we have to keep aware of. And these are April, July, and September. Now they still follow the same basic rule, but just mainly because of pronunciation issues, we say them slightly differently. Okay, so keep in mind it's shigatsu for April, and then shichigatsu for July, and kugatsu for September. Okay, so otherwise all the other ones, you know, for example, junigatsu, this is December. So as long as you can count to 12, you can, and remember this word gatsu, you can do this. Alright, now the last bit, I guess, when we're looking at date, is we got to look at days. Now this, when I'm talking about how I find that my students and whatever don't really study this part much, this is the bit I'm talking about. Everyone can kind of learn the years and days pretty easily, years and months pretty easily. It's when we get to the days, it's quite tricky. Now, I'm not entirely sure why this is the case. I think days in particular are kind of hard because when Japanese got modernized, I'm not sure they quite modernized the days, the way the days are pronounced. I could be wrong about that, but anyway, they don't really follow a pattern that closely. I think they do now, because I guess because I've learnt them all, and especially when you look at the generic counter, it seems like there's a big link there. But anyway, they do seem to be a bit random. Now, where do we start? Well, first off, we should just learn the counter for day. Okay. So it's this character here, Nichi. Now, this character actually means sun. Alright, that kind of makes sense. We have a day when the sun's out. Alright, Nichi. But this character has some other readings. So we're going to see it's not always going to be read as Nichi, which is where the problem comes in for a lot of people. So, where do we start? Well, it's important to kind of keep in mind that there is a pretty common pattern with all our counting. So we just have to kind of remember that 1 to 10, 14, 24 are kind of not exception readings, but they're kind of strange readings. And then every other number, I missed 20 from that list as well, sorry. So 1 to 10, 14, 20, and 24. But apart from those, these are all, let me just do this. They all kind of follow a pretty standard pattern. Anyway, so let's just skip 1 to 10 and we'll start from 11 because I said 1 to 10 are a bit strange. So it's following the same formula that we're used to. We take a number, so ju ichi, which is 11, and then we add nichi, which means day. So ju ichi nichi is like the 11th day of the month. Ju ni nichi, 12th day, and so on and so forth. Just make these a bit bigger actually. 30. Not the greatest formatting, but not even sure how to join these two together. I'm sure there's an easy way. Anyway, doesn't really matter. Don't worry about the kanji here so much, okay? But as we can see, Ju ni nichi, the 12th day, Ju san nichi. And like I said, 14 is an exception, so we'll skip it. Ju go nichi, Ju roku nichi. Okay, so we can remember our numbers pretty easily. So I'm just gonna bold the exceptions. Okay, so apart from these ones, it's following a pretty standard system. These are not so hard to remember, I think. It's just kind of long. Let me write them in hiragana. Now, it's the other ones which we have to spend a bit more time on. Okay. So the general rule is that they're all going to end in ka, which is another reading of this kanji for day. Just put this on charge quickly. Okay, so they're going to end in ka. Of course, even that doesn't hold sway because the first day is read as tsuitachi. Okay, and after that we have futsuka, mikka, notice the small tsu, yokka, itsuka, muika, nanoka, yoka. So notice already we have some very similar sounding runs, yokka and yoka. Now some of you might be lucky enough to have a birthday on one of these days, so then you can just remember your birthday and think, well, the other one's just the other one. For the rest of us who don't have a birthday, like me, on this day, we can just kind of say, for me, the mnemonic I used to kind of use was, well, yokka is first, so it's kind of a shorter sound. 4 is before 8, shorter sound. And then 8 is after 4, so it's longer, it's further away, so it's a longer sound. Yoka. Okay, we keep going, kokonoka, toka. Okay, and then after that, it's easy for these next three. It's just ju ichi nichi, so 11th day. Ju ni nichi, 12th day. Ju san nichi, 13th day. Alright, now for 14, we just take the word for 4 that we saw earlier, yokka, so ju yokka. Then we keep going all the way up to 20, which is hatsuka. Now, I'll take a little bit of a detour here and talk about age. Okay, so 20 is kind of important in Japan. It's when you can smoke and drink and I think vote as well. So it's kind of that I guess Americans would think of this as being 21. In Australia, this is more of us being 18. So it's kind of a significant age in Japan. And so it's got a, you don't say nijusei. Okay, when you're talking about someone who's 20 years old, you've got kind of a special word, which is hatachi. Okay, so we've got hatsuka, hatachi. You can kind of see that there's a bit of similarity here. Alright, but then we keep going as per usual until we get to 24, which again is our it's following the same thing like 14 was, where we have niju, so 20, and then yokka, which is our word for 4 again. So this comes into it. So niju yokka. And then we just keep going all the way up to san ju ichi nichi. Alright, so the 31st day of the month. Alright. So once we've got all that, we can pretty much say any date now. So how will we say today's date? Well, today's date is the 2nd of April. So Japanese date system, normally you flip it. So you start from the year first. Alright, so first we do 2018, which is what we did up here. Okay, so we start with our year. So Nisen, so 2000. Juhachi, so 18. Nen, so 2018. And then we do the month. So Shigatsu. It's one of our kind of changing pronunciations. Doesn't really follow the system, I guess. Shigatsu. And then we need second. Alright, so this is one of the harder ones. But yeah. Futsuka. Okay. So Futsuka desu. So 2018年4月2日です. Alright. And similarly, if we were going to talk about the Heisei, I mean, it doesn't really change that much. Because it's only the year that you really have to keep in mind. But it would look like that. Heisei 30年4月2日. Alright, that's the general way. So I would encourage you guys, if you want to remember this, just try and memorize your own birthday. So someone might ask you, alright, so tanjoubi is the word for birthday. Tanjoubi wa itsu desu ka? Then you can reply. Now, it's the other reason I would really recommend that you learn your birthday is that we're going to see when we talk about spans of months that this gatsu, it uses the same kanji but a different pronunciation. So some people have issues remembering, well, is it gatsu or is it getsu? So at least if you remember your own birthday, you'll know, okay, well, month is gatsu, span of months is getsu. But we'll get to that in a second. So yeah, it's good to remember your birthday for that reason. All right. My phone restarted for some reason. Weird. Okay. So next up is we're going to look at time. Alright, so again we're going to be dealing with a counter here. This is a new counter. Wrong one. Okay, so this counter, this basically means time, and it's this character is G. Now if we look closely at this character, we'll see on the left hand side, it's our counter for day or sun that we saw earlier. Alright, and then this one on the right is a kanji which is read as tera, which is temple. So I always kind of tell people, well, if you think about, ancient feudal Japan, it's likely that the priests and people who worked at temples, for example, were the people with the sundials or whatever. They were the timekeepers. So I was just used to think, sundials at the temple, right, for the character for time. But anyway, this is our counter as well. So we're going to use this when we talk about a clock. All right. So again, it's pretty straightforward with the using the counters for clock, for o'clocks. All right. So we just get, again, we get 1, and we add our character for time. Okay, so 1 o'clock. All right, and we can just do that all the way up to just 12 o'clock. And all the times in between. Now there are, again, 3 that we have to be aware of, and we're going to see that there's kind of a repeating pattern of the ones which change pronunciation. So basically it's 4, 7, and 9 o'clock we have to be aware of. And these are yoji, shichiji, and again kuji. Okay, So these are important to keep in mind. But having said that, I mean, it's not the be all and end all if you get these wrong. I mean, if you say shiji to some Japanese people or nanaji, you probably will be understood. Um, it's not a big deal, but definitely the priority is just learning your numbers and learning these counters, and then you can pick up you'll pick up the changing pronunciations over time, and Japanese people will correct you as well, which is basically how I got better at Japanese, by constantly having very kind people around me correcting me on the mistakes that I made. Okay, so that's o'clock. So how do we add minutes? Well, we need another counter, but it's this one here, not that fun, this fun. So this fun is, we're going to use it as a counter for minutes. What it actually means though is to divide. Okay, so if we think of a minute as a division of an hour or something like that. Okay, but it's read as fun, and we'll see it's also read some other things. Now this one, the changing pronunciation is a little bit trickier. So like I said, normally we just add fun to the number to say minutes, but there are quite a lot of exceptions to this. And again, I'm just going to show you a table. Still pretty bad. There was a way, I'm sure there is. It's so small. Why is this so hard to do? Not ideal. Let's work out a better way to display this. Gotta be smaller, I guess. Anyway, you get the general idea. There we go. Finally. So these are the exception readings. Not really exceptions, I guess, but they just change pronunciation just to make it easier to say. But if it's not in this table, you just put the number and then fun. Okay, so it is in this table for 1 minute, so ippun, 1 minute. And then 2 is not in this table, so we just say 2 followed by fun. So 2 fun. Then 3 pun, 4 pun, and then 5 fun. 6 pun, 7 fun, 8 pun, 9 fun, 10 pun. Alright, and notice this little tsu. Alright, so how do we go above 10 minutes? Well, we basically use the normal pronunciation for like the higher part, so the left-hand part of the number, and then we use the same readings for the right sides of the number. So for example, if we take 24 minutes, okay, so the higher part of the number here is 20, the lower part of the number is 4. So here we say, just like normal, we would say niju. Alright, we don't put minute on here yet because minute comes at the very end. So minute we're going to have to put here, but we follow this reading. Okay. Okay, so 24 minutes is read as 24分. Let's take another example. We'll do 50 minutes. So 50. Okay. So basically we can split up like this. The left side is, the higher number is like the 50 and the lower number is the 0. So how do we do 50? Well, normally we'd say goju, but that ju, because it's kind of this lower number, it's going to take this pronunciation. So we would end up reading it like this. Gojupun. Okay, 50 minutes. This takes a little bit to get used to. There are some other pronunciations, like for example, I was originally taught you should say jippun for 10 minutes, but I don't really think this is used much anymore. It's not that it's wrong, you never really hear it. This juppun is much more familiar. Now, one thing I just want to point out that I remember came up on an exam once and tricked a lot of people out. Not me, thankfully, but it did a lot of people. So we haven't quite looked at the kanji yet, but the kanji for 10 is this kanji. Okay, 10, it's like a cross. And I showed you before that the kanji for minute is this one, fun. So, for example, we can see up here, 10 minutes would just be written like that. Kind of makes sense. Alright, but this kanji can actually have two readings depending on the context. So we can have our usual one, juppun, which is 10 minutes, which is the one we just saw. But we can also read this kanji as jubun. Now what's the difference between these two? Well, like I said, this is 10 minutes. This is more, it's like enough or sufficient. So jubun desu, like that's enough. So yeah, just keep in mind that there's no difference between these kanji. You really just have to go by context and go, well, are they talking about time or are they talking about being enough of something? Yeah, just keep in mind that these things happen quite a lot. Now, how do we do seconds? Seconds are not super important. You're not going to come up across them that much. But it's this kanji here, byo, which means seconds. And then, yeah, there's no really exceptions for these. We just add the number. So 3 秒, 3 seconds. 50 秒. Alright, 50 seconds. So not much to do there. So if we were going to say the time now, so it's 11:19. Alright, so we can ask the question that maybe a lot of you will know. Nanji desu ka? Okay, so if we notice, this ji is what we came across right at the beginning when we looked at our o'clock. Alright, so when you say nan, because this word means what, nanji desu ka is what time is it? Okay, you can add ima to the front, but ima means now, but I mean it's normally pretty obvious that you're asking for the time at this point, the current time. So nanji desu ka? Alright, so we got 11:19. So when we do it, the hours and then minutes first. So hours first, sorry, then minutes. So how do we do 11? Well, we do 10 and 1. So 10 is ju. And we have 1, which is ichi. And then we add ji. Okay, so 11 o'clock. And then ju q 19分. Alright, and then to be polite, put a des on the end, right? Because we had a des in the question, so we should really put a des in the answer. So 11時19分です. Alright, pretty kind of an easy time, this one. 19 is, if we remember back to our table up here, it's not in this table, so it makes it a bit easier to remember. Alright, so 11時19分です. Alright, so that's pretty much all you need to know for time. There are a few other words that are useful. So we've got gogo and gozen. Okay, I should probably put them around this way. Okay, so this is AM and this is PM. Alright, now if we look at the kanji, we'll notice that we have the same kanji here, because this go kind of means midday. I think it actually might mean noon as well, but I know at least, I'm pretty sure it means midday. Let's have a look. Yeah, noon. But anyway, basically midday. But this kanji means before, so before noon, AM. This kanji means after or later, so after noon. Alright. Now the important thing to keep in mind when we use these is that AM and PM actually goes at the front of time. So right now, we said it was 11:19. So we would put it here. So gozen 11時19分. Yeah. The other thing with time is you still have 24-hour time in Japan. I don't think it really gets used that much compared to this. People are more likely to say AM and PM. But military time kind of works the same as it does in English. So if we were going to say, 3 o'clock, 1500, as we'd say in English, you just say it kind of literally as you do here. So 15時. Okay, and obviously you don't need to say AM or PM because that's the whole point of military time. 15時. I mean, it's worth knowing, but I honestly didn't hear it come up that much. Okay, so that's the basics of time. Okay, next thing we're going to look at is spans of time. So this is a little bit more complicated, but again, we're just kind of using our counters once again. So first off, we've got kan. Right, this character is really important whenever we're looking at it. Probably shouldn't have just searched for kan. Anyway, but we have our kanji here. Alright, and this is what we use. This kanji actually means interval or a space, and this is why we use it for spans of time. So we can put it on the end of certain things, and then it makes it going from basically a statement of time to a statement of a span of time. Now notice it doesn't often go on minutes, but I found, I've actually been, over the last few years, I've been really looking to see how it is, and very anecdotally, I'm just going to say 50-50 is how I would do the breakdown. So sometimes it's put on minutes, sometimes it isn't. I don't think there's really a hard and fast rule, it's just personal preference. But we'll see how it does get used. So for example, if we want to say basically a period of 3 hours and 20 minutes. So I think I said 20 minutes, didn't I? Okay, so sanji, 3 o'clock. Sanjikan, 3 hours. Sanji, 3 o'clock. Sanjikan, 3 hours. 20分. Alright, then we just put 20 minutes. So like I said, some people might put kan there, but here it's more likely that the kan is going to come after the hours and the minutes just kind of dangle in the wind there. And then if we look at days, alright, so again, you'll have to think back to this table we just did, but you can take any of these periods from here, and we'll take a bit of an interesting one, okay? So we'll take the 20th. Okay. Well, I should say it's not the 20 day, it's not the 20th, I guess, but it's 20 days. Alright, so this is the kanji for the 20th day of, so when you see this, you're not going to think of 20 days. You're going to, if you're reading this correctly, this in your head should say 20th day, all right, of the calendar. So how do we show the difference between the two? Well, use our counter. Okay. Now, just keep in mind that 20 is a bit of an exception reading. Okay, so it's not niju nichikan. Okay, it's this 20日間. Okay, but this is the important thing that this counter does. It kind of delineates the difference between days. All right. And we could say something like so 3年間. All right, and this is 3 years. 3年間. Now, one that often I used to kind of trick people is that we can have this guy. So these characters can be read one of two ways. So if we go up to our table here, we see, well, the character's here, and it's read as tsuitachi. Okay. So this is the first day of the month. All right, first day of the calendar, basically. Or we can read this as ichinichi, so 1 day. Okay. And when it's read as ichinichi, we don't need to put kan on the end because ichinichi is already a span of a day. We don't need to make that now obvious with kan because we've got this other word tsuitachi. The other one worth looking at is weeks. So we have this kanji shu. Okay. Now there are a few pronunciation changes, but we'll just look at an easy one first. Got there in the end. 2週間. Okay. So 2 weeks period. Period of 2 weeks, whatever. Now, there are 2 exceptions we should keep in mind for this, and it's for 1 week, we read as 1週間 rather than 1週間. And kind of similarly, for 8 weeks, we read as 8週間 rather than 8週間. So they're the only 2 we have. But we'll notice that these pronunciation changes are very common patterns. Now, span of months. This is the one that I kind of flagged before that causes issues for some people. So all we do is we've got the counter, but the counter, why would that? Okay, so this is the counter that we need. Now, some of you might look at this and go, well, this looks awfully a lot like ke from katakana, and you'd be right, it does look like it. It's kind of maybe a bit hard to tell, but this ke is actually smaller than the other kanji here. It's a half size kanji. Alright, now I don't really want to go into too much detail about this, but this is an abbreviation for another kanji it read as Ke? I can never remember how this original one is read. I thought it was Ko. Yeah, it was. Okay, so this abbreviation you can see at the top there. This bit is where this comes from. Okay, so this is an abbreviation for this kanji, and this kanji is itself a counter. I think it's the original counter kanji that came. So that's what this is. All right, and then we've got our kanji again for month. Okay, but here there are two things to keep in mind. First of all, this thing which looks like a little katakana ke is actually read as ka. Okay, and this kanji, which before we saw is read as gatsu, is read now as getsu. Okay, this is very confusing for some people, and so it should be. It's kind of weird. But I've noticed actually that people are no longer really following this system. So, for example, I've seen recently a lot of people aren't bothering to write this anymore, and instead they're using a mini katakana ka. So you can read this as kagetsu as well. And I've also seen this. Okay, people, oops, not that one. I swear this, the menu that I see for my conversion is different from when I press enter. But anyway, I've also seen it written like this as well. So people actually use a full-size hiragana ka. So when you think of the etymology of this, it doesn't really make sense to use this, but at least you can read it slightly easier. So I guess this is why. But all three of these I've noticed are being used: full-size, half-size, ke, ka, hiragana, katakana. Oh, I lost the camera. All of these are being used. So it's kind of much of a muchness really, which one you want to go with. Now the other reason to keep in mind why this character is read the way it is it's used often in place names. Okay, so there's a kind of a pretty famous place in Tokyo. Okay, this one. Okay, so we see it's in here, Sendagaya. All right, so it can be used, and where I lived in Japan also had this in the name, so it's definitely not uncommon. It's first name proper nouns. Okay, so having said all that, how do we actually do spans of months? Well, we take our number. Actually, it's a bad example. Let's do this one. Okay, so we'll write it like this, but we could also write it like this. Okay, both of these are the same thing. How would we actually read them? Ikagetsu. Okay, so this is 2 months. Like it's a span of months, right? Ikagetsu. So we can do that for everything. Sankagetsu. Alright, we just keep going. Now there are, again, some exceptions we have to keep in mind, and these are for 1 month, 6 months, and 10 months. I was about to sneeze. 10 months. Okay, and these are respectively Ikagetsu, Rokkagetsu. Oh, shouldn't have used kanji there. And Jukagetsu. Okay, Ikagetsu, Rokkagetsu, Jukagetsu. Okay, so those are the exceptions, otherwise they're all read, right? So we could say Ju Ikkagetsu, alright, for 11 months. So it follows the same system as our minutes did, okay? So the kind of left side of the number stays the same, and it's the right side, so the 11 months this is, by the way. But so like this left side, ju stays the same, but ikkagetsu takes this exception reading, and we could say niju kagetsu. Again, same thing. The 10 is taken from here. Niju kagetsu, sanju-san kagetsu, so 33 months. That just follows it normally. Okay. Alright, so the last thing I want to look at, and it's what I mentioned earlier, is that there's kind of a few tables which, a few counters that if you learn them, that's pretty much all you need to know up until a certain point. Like until you get to like university level Japanese, I think, or I guess I'm not exactly sure what level of JLPT. I would think this should be good enough. At least you should be able to take JLPT N4 knowing this amount, and I would say probably JLPT N3 you'd probably get away with this. I'm not too sure about that, but at least these will be very useful up until then. And we see we've got certain counters here. I might just put these on a new page. Okay. It's like all in bold, is it? Yeah, it is. Anyway. Alright, so some of these you might know, some of them you might not. So we have nin. Alright, this is the character for person. We saw this a while ago, so to count number of people. We have en. We saw this before, so to count money. There's also a counter. Hon. Alright, so this character, a lot of you are like, well, this means book. Okay, if you know your kanji. Yes, it does mean book, but we also use it to count long cylindrical objects. Okay, so for example, my water bottle here. Bit of a delay on the telecast, but my water bottle is not quite a frame. This one is this would be hon. All right, ippon we would say one water bottle. Okay, long thin objects. So chopsticks as well. Any kind of long thin objects. So bottles is really the most common one. Now we have mai. Okay, so thin objects. We got here paper, shirts, these kind of things. Satsu is used for bound objects, so basically books. So you might go, wait, we've got a kanji for book and we don't even use it to count books. Yeah, I know. We got hiki. Now I mentioned this one before when I was talking about the plurals thing in Japanese. So this is used to count small animals, so cats or dogs. Now it's not. I don't think that this is maybe a Japanese person correct me here, but I don't really think this is super consistent. But kind of once you start getting to bigger animals, you have a different counter. And I normally just say to people, once you get to about the size of a horse, this is when you start changing the counter, and it's tall. Okay, so elephants as well are tall. But it's kind of hard to say that. And then we also have some exceptions, so like rabbits have a different counter as well. So anyway, just keep in mind. So cats and dogs basically is what we can use hiki for. Take a trip to the zoo in Japan and get Japanese people to point out all the animals and count them for you, and then you'll get a bit of a better idea. Sai, talked about this one earlier, right? So there are actually two kanji for this. Most of you might be familiar with this one. This one is very common as well, though. They kind of get used interchangeably. So, count the age of living creatures, such as people or animals. Now, ko, really handy one, this one. Small objects. They don't have to be round, but they often are. Kai, so number of times. And some of you might also recognize kai as a counter for floors. So you say ikkai, nikai, sankai when you're talking about floors of a building. That's a different kanji though, but yes, that is also one that you can, I would say is also a kind of important one. Now this one, not super important, kasho, if we're looking in relatively to all these. But it's used to count number of locations. So when you travel around the world, you can say. Now, how do you read these? I'm actually not going to go into how to read these because it's kind of tricky and there are many, many, many exceptions. I might leave that for a lesson for another time. But if we... It's a good one to look at. We'll do people, okay? We'll do people and you get a general idea. But so for people, there are exceptions for one person and two people. So we say hitori for one person, futari for two people, and then after that it's really easy. We just add the number, and then add the counter. Okay, there's even an exception here. Okay, but we just keep going up. So hitori, one person, futari, two people, sannin, three people, yonin, gonin, rokunin, shichinin, hachinin, kyunin, junin, nijunin, you know, keep going up and up and up and up. So nijunin is 20 people, by the way, just don't get confused there. But, just keep in mind that there are a lot of exceptions when we actually read these. And even if we look at like bottles, it's not ichihon, it's ippon, nihon, sambon, yonhon, gohon, roppon. We just keep going up. So it's there's some tricky pronunciations with these, which is why I don't really want to go into it now. Just keep in mind that we have this thing called counters. Okay, I think I might leave it there. There are some other things I want to do with the counters. I might just leave it with for another lesson. Let's just make a little note down here. Okay, I think I'll finish the stream there. Thanks so much everyone for watching. Again, if you have any queries, please leave a comment or send me an email. This sheet is available in the YouTube description box, and you can just have a look at it if you want. And yeah, that's about it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys some other time.